Jefe, welcome to the podcast. It is so great to have you here. Now, let me take a stab at introducing you. Your CV is so extensive, but I like how you promote yourself on Instagram: father, husband, bike mechanic, endurance cyclist, rider of Revel, and my personal favorite, chaos master of the Colorado Trail. Yeah, Colorado Trail race. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Very well, very well. Now, and I guess to bring a little bit more clarity to that, I would describe you as maybe doing some research. It sounds like three main pillars: outdoor enthusiast, uh, bikepacking racer, and then race director. Is that a? I mean, how do you introduce yourself at parties?
Oh man. Yeah, I generally am one of those people that doesn't necessarily like wear myself on my sleeve. So I'll only just be like, hi, I'm FA and let people find out if they want to find out. But I mean it's fair. And I think like my Instagram is what you read is fairly accurate. I take being a father and a husband very seriously. And it's kind of pushed the bike pack racing thing a little bit back farther in the priority scheme. But I still love to do it and I still do it whenever I can. But yeah, I mean, I love being outside, hiking, biking, camping. I mean, I like doing all that stuff. So biking's my favorite thing to do, but yeah.
Love it. And how'd you get into the outdoors?
By moving to Gunnison, Colorado, to be honest. As a kid, I lived in a fairly rural place and we played outside all the time. Um, but I would say I was like, definitely my late teenage years when I moved to Gunnison and I didn't fall in love with it right off the bat. It took me a while to kind of get into the lifestyle of living here. And, uh, and there's just tons of public land access here, and people live here for a reason, and it's usually for some sort of outdoor activity that they love: fishing, biking, skiing, all those kind of things. And yeah, I just started hanging out with people who were doing those sorts of things, and I think it was 2 years I was living in Gunnison. I hooked up with a friend of mine who was planning a trip to hike the Colorado Trail, and at the time, I was kind of looking for something big to kind of test myself and to see something beyond working and just kind of hanging out. And so I kind of tagged along with him, and we ended up just hiking from Waterton Canyon to Monarch Pass that summer. But it was definitely a life changing experience. I would say that leading up to that hike, I was a little bit more of a materialistic person. Um, and I had to make a choice to kind of give up some of that material comfort in order to do that hike because I didn't have a lot of money, and it was a hard decision to make at the time. But I made the decision to go take the hike and to see what was out there. Uh, it was a total kick in the ass. It really, really. I went backpacking once before I did that, so I definitely jumped in with both feet. But I was immediately addicted. Addicted. I did a lot of backpacking after that and just being outside, testing my body and my limits and just enjoying the sunrises and sunsets and stuff. And um, I've kind of been on that quest ever since.
Now, I had the opportunity to live in Colorado for a few years, and it's kind of interesting to hear your perspective too, as a non-native that jumped into Colorado. Gunnison is at this point, I think, maybe fairly well known, although my audience is pretty is shout out to is surprisingly international. I would describe Gunnison as a mountain town, really deep in the Colorado mountains, but still large enough that it has maybe the conveniences of a mid-sized town, but still immediate access to the outdoors. Is that how you would frame it? Kind of in an outdoor paradise?
Yeah, I mean, Gunnison's. I would say it's a mountain town, but it's not a mountain town in that it's like right up against the mountains. Like Crested Butte. Even Salida are a little bit closer to the mountains. We're a little bit more of a high desert, but surrounded by mountains. But it is a little bit bigger of a town. There's a university here, which kind of makes it a little bit less seasonal in a way. Um, it's not a big town. I think the population's only like 7 or 8 thousand people, so it's not huge by any means. But there's relatively big towns close by, and it's right in the center of the mountains. We are right between the Elks, the West Elks, and the San Juans, the Saguache Range, the Collegiates. They're all an hour or two away from where we live. It's a wonderful location.
It sounds like it. But now, coming from the East Coast and maybe not a huge outdoor background, how did you become aware of Gunnison, and like in terms of your initial motivation to move there?
It was the university. It wasn't me going to the school, but my friends who I went to high school with. So there was a group of like four of us who were pretty good friends in high school, and one of them came out his freshman year to Western, and then another one was going to come out his sophomore year, and then the first was returning. And they were like, "We're moving to Gunnison," and at the time I was like kind of needing to get out of Connecticut where I grew up, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't really have a path in mind or anything. Um, and my one friend who had been out here, he was like, "Yeah, you don't need a car. It's a small enough town. You can ride your bike everywhere." And I didn't, I didn't own a car. And the East Coast, it's pretty hard to live without a car in Connecticut. It's not like public transportation unless you live in a city. And it sounded fascinating to me. And I was like, I just kind of like tagged onto them and was like, let's go see what's out there. And like I said, I got here and I was like, what is, because it's a little bit of a ranch town too. And it was definitely much more so when I moved here, early 90s. It was definitely a little more hick, a little bit more redneck. And I was like, what the hell should I do? Uh, but then you find those friends who are into doing stuff. And like I said, I started getting into the things that make you want to live here. And then it was like, oh, and I haven't left. I just love it here.
That's awesome. I'm just so curious to hear. Have you seen it change and evolve over the past decades? And I imagine too, especially kind of in this post-COVID world, where like more remote workers, it's probably a fairly big destination, I imagine, for people at this point.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. I would say that the flavor of the town is still more or less the same. But yeah, it's definitely changed. Remote working, Crested Butte's kind of been discovered, and we're kind of like Crested Butte and Gunnison are definitely tied towns. We share the Gunnison Valley, and a lot of people who work in Crested Butte live in Gunnison, all that kind of stuff. And we recreate in Crested Butte if you live in Gunnison. They're definitely connected, and both of them have definitely been discovered, and it's definitely grown. The grocery store runs out of food. It used to happen. But at the same time, like I said, that it's still, to me, it's still Gunnison. It's changed, but it's still, there's still a lot of people here that are here for the right reasons.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, you talked about jumping in to hiking the Colorado Trail. It sounds like with fairly limited experience, that seems to be a trend I notice of the adventures I have in my podcast, where they just kind of jump into the deep end. Was that your intention, or did you kind of unknowingly bite off more than you could chew? What was your thought process there?
I definitely bit off more than I could chew.
Okay.
I wasn't in shape for it. I didn't really know how to camp. I ended up getting sick. I think either giardia or food poisoning. Because I probably wasn't washing my hands, all those kinds of things. It was a huge adventure and learning experience. And it was a really dry summer the year we were doing it, and there were some forest fires in the south and scarcity of water, and we ended up not finishing it, those reasons. But yeah, like I said, I was looking for something like that. I think I was 21 when I did that, and I needed something to kick my ass, to be honest. And yeah, it was kind of the perfect thing in a way.
Well, yeah, it's interesting how you describe maybe needing a tough adventure, a bit of a trial here. Now, this is any way you slice it, right, is an extended time in the outdoors. How did and you talked a little bit about how you maybe had to move away from a materialistic lifestyle to be able to do this. How long were you out hiking, and then did you have to make maybe significant changes to your life to have the time and to be able to afford this?
Yeah, I mean, I had just moved into a house, and I had been living in a trailer park before that, and with like four roommates, and just not having my own space and all that kind of stuff. And I moved into this house and had my own room, and it was I was into like music, so I had a lot of CDs, and I was into buying CDs, and back in the day when that was a thing, and so that my focus was just very different, and I ended up moving all my stuff into a storage unit. And when I got back to Gunnison after hiking the trail, I was homeless and I was sleeping on people's couches, and until I found another place to live. Yeah, yeah. It basically was like an introduction to dirtbag lifestyle, and kind of like not only the adventure side of it, but also the how to make it work. Um, and that's kind of how I made it work, was just kind of scraping by.
Wow. Uh, yeah, I hear you on that one. I for a period of time was trying real hard to be a ski bum, so it's tough but really rewarding lifestyle, I guess. now, now did after the Colorado Trail, or at least the portion of it, did cycling and biking kind of, was that a natural extension, or was there still more development first?
When I actually moved out to Gunnison, a few years earlier, I was a mountain biker. But I wasn't very good, and I wasn't good about taking care of my bikes. It never worked very well, and I didn't really have the patience um, to kind of become a good mountain biker at the time. We had a lot of East Coast in us still. We'd get mad at our bikes and throw them when they didn't work or when we couldn't clean something, all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of stepped away from mountain biking while I was backpacking, and I backpacked a lot for, gosh, it was probably like 5 or 6 years. Um, yeah, I think it was like 5 or 6 years, and that I learned to just kind of chill out and slow down and relax. And then I got back into mountain biking. Actually, I didn't have a car, and I was backpacking a lot, and I had a dog, and I would get a ride out to the woods, with someone going for a day hike, and I would backpack around, and I'd try to hitchhike back to town. And I was making that work, but it was also like I'd always have to wait for someone to give me a ride. Hitchhiking with a dog wasn't easy, all those kinds of things. And then I saw someone riding around town with a bob trailer and their dog in the back, and I was like, that's how I'm going to do it. And so I bought a bike and a bob trailer, and that was my plan, was to go ride out to trailheads, go for a backpacking trip, and then ride back to town. And I never actually did that. I just started pulling the trailer around with the dog, and we would just, it opened my eyes to like the more places I could go. And we spent the whole summer doing that. And so that was kind of my reintroduction to mountain biking, was doing these big trips with my dog, and just exploring the area around Gunnison, just going to like random places. And it was a great summer. And we ended that summer by doing the southern half of the Colorado Trail from Durango back to Gunnison. And yeah, so it's kind of wrapped it up into the Colorado Trail again too.
It sounds like a big summer, and it's almost like the bike really gave you maybe a sense of freedom.
Oh, it was huge. I mean, I had like a decent job cooking. I was cooking at the hospital, and I only had to work 3 days a week because I was working 12-hour shifts. And like, I was, living in kind of a crappy house, didn't pay a lot of rent. And I had 4 days off every week, and I would just be like, all right, where are we going? Then I just pull out the maps and like try to figure out a way to ride and find trails and roads. Yeah, it was super, super fun.
Do you find that in general, that you're somebody who, I guess I don't. Would you describe yourself maybe as like less career oriented and more just like nature oriented or
Yeah.
outdoors oriented?
Definitely, definitely true. My quote unquote career, it's ever been a high focus in my life. And it's, well, it's kind of that, not necessarily materialistic choice at the same time, but like that was a choice I made, like I was never seeking career opportunities. I was seeking adventure opportunities in a way to just kind of make it work. Um,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, but it's interesting on that front because looking at your race results, like you definitely at least have to be competitive, or I guess it's somehow you I mean, really any starting line that you get to, you're a potential winner of the race. So, I mean, would you say you have a competitive mindset, or how does this kind of all evolve?
Yeah, it's fair to say I have a competitive mindset. I, I feel like um, I'm really good at not letting it out when I don't want to. I try not to be competitive in like everyday life or just going for bike rides with friends. I'm not that kind of person that like needs to drop people or put the hammer on people or anything like that. Like it's definitely comes out in racing. And bike pack racing, I've been very successful and competitive. In other bike racing, I'm really not that fast. I do well when the longer the distance is, and I enjoy doing all kinds of bike racing. But that's where I'm most competitive, is if it's long and there's some dark and all that kind of stuff.
What does it take to be so successful at these longer bike pack? I mean, we're talking basically. I think if we look at your race results, any race that you've won has been maybe minimum 3 days, if not longer, several hundred miles, and typically in maybe the more obscure or away from road trails, the better you do.
Yeah, that's fair to say. Like I said, like it's got to be over 200 miles for me to have a chance of winning kind of a thing. Uh, a lot. I like to say that bike pack racing or ultra endurance racing, there's a bunch of different terms for it. Um, it's so much of it's mental. After the first 24 hours, I like to say after the first 24 hours, it's almost all mental. Everybody gets tired and sore and kind of feels like shit after the first 24 hours. If you focus on that and you're not okay with feeling not so great, you're gonna eat yourself up and you're not gonna do very well. But if you're kind of like, this is how it is, and if you're willing to suffer through it, you can keep pushing your body. So it's that mental aspect, and I think that's something, I've done a lot of hard things before I started racing, and and I just have always enjoyed it. Like I wasn't like, I'm doing something hard, I'm cool. It was like, I want to see what's on the other side of this hill. You get to that hill and you're like, I want to see what's on the other side of that hill. Like it's compelling to travel. And so like that has always kind of kept it going for me. It's just it's kind of self-satisfying in a way.
Oh, that's interesting. Now it's also interesting too to hear you talk about the other kind of bike racing and that kind of avenue. I've noticed I've got a lot of friends that are competitive, maybe in like the triathlon or more organized racing structure. But when you move them into the outdoors, something about that, maybe the wilderness, really is unnerving. But it sounds like that doesn't maybe affect you, or maybe that environment pushes you forward.
I generally excel in those situations for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for a long time, um, when I was still kind of getting, more experience in the bike pack racing scene and all that stuff. It was when the races were gnarly, uh, when the weather was crappy, that kind of stuff was usually when I did the best. And that was true. I got into the bike pack racing thing through like 100-mile races and 24-hour races. And, I was like okay at those, but if it rained all night, I did a lot better. Um, and it was same thing. It was just like I wanted I wanted to finish. I wasn't expecting it to be sunny and nice. Um, and so like I was just able to get through those kind of like adverse kind of conditions better than others.
Now, it is really interesting to hear you start to talk about the conditions, and I think the competitive fire clearly really starts to come out, which is cool to see. Are you how much is it a race against yourself, or how much are you marking competitors and thinking I need to stay ahead of them, or I need to adapt my strategy based on how, second place and third place is doing?
That's a great question. That's it, kind of a struggle. I I tend to get wrapped up in the competition once I'm out there. And I definitely want to do as best as I can as compared to others, not just as best as I can. And so it definitely pushes me harder. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to pushing yourself and testing yourself and doing the best you can do. But it's hard not to get caught up in the actual competition. Um, in fact, there's a style of doing bike pack routes. They call it ATT, an individual time trial. And I've only done one true individual time trial where it wasn't a group start. It wasn't like technically a race, but just a race against the clock. Um, and I really enjoyed it because I didn't focus on anybody else. And I actually did really well. I think because I wasn't doing stupid things. I think that when you're racing against other people, you kind of get caught up in excitement and you push yourself when you shouldn't push yourself. And you don't listen to your body as well. And taking care of yourself is definitely a big part of, big long races because, anybody can go hard for a certain period of time, but there's a point where you need to be making sure you're eating, drinking, taking care of your feet, taking care of your butt, all those things that need to be taken care of, or they'll come back later and really kind of hamper your performance.
That yeah, that's it. That's interesting to hear the dynamic between maybe a group start and that competitive versus an individual time trial. Now, do you find you've talked a little bit about how anybody can maybe race hard for those first 24 hours, but then after that, the mental game starts to happen. Is your strategy generally to ride a consistent, kind of methodical race, or are you more maybe spurts and slowdowns depending on how the conditions are?
I've definitely learned to let it settle out. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I've done enough of these where it's it's amazing. We just said, like how many people go fast for the first 24 hours. Um, and at the beginning of last year's Colorado Trail race, I was telling everybody like the race doesn't start until it gets dark or it rains. And it's true. Like when it's sunny and beautiful and everybody's fresh, there's people like everybody's going pretty fast. But then, as soon as things get a little scary and a little bit less comfortable, it's amazing to see the field break apart. And that's the thing I've learned. It's like there's some really fast people out there. And you kind of like, if you let yourself get caught up and you're like, I got to keep up with this guy, like he's going really fast. But it's amazing to me how often you never see those guys after the first couple days.
I see. And how I like that. I like that kind of nomenclature, right? Of the race doesn't start really until things get hard. Uh, how much are you thinking about weather? I just, from riding the Colorado Trail, the weather is pretty ferocious. Now, are you somebody who is planning out and watching the reports days ahead and are saying like, hey, I need to be off trail or maybe like in cover through this rainstorm? Or are you somebody who just rides through it?
I definitely get weather obsessed leading up to events. But once I'm out there, I don't pay attention to the weather. I'm not trying to keep track on things. At that point, you're just rolling with things and seeing what happens. You can't really I can't really like change my pace that much when I'm out there. I could slow down, obviously. And generally I try not to. I definitely have pushed through some pretty big storms. Sometimes I've probably made some questionable decisions doing that. Um, but yeah, you know, that long of an event going through the mountains, you really can't predict any of that stuff anyways. The mountains have their own weather and microclimes, and the San Juans especially. Uh, if it's going to rain anywhere, it's going to rain in San Juans, and you just kind of plan on getting your ass kicked, and hopefully it's not too bad.
It seems like from hearing you and others talk about it, there is a lot you can do in preparation for this event, but once it's happening, it's a little bit, I don't know, I almost want to say out of your hands, but maybe that's not the right.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to once again that mental toughness, and hopefully you make good gear choices that are going to keep you from getting too cold. Um, and it's also like being able to keep moving if it is cold, and not having to stop. And that's some of that's just having endurance and having practice pushing yourself for long hard days. And um, but yeah, you're so subject to Mother Nature once you're out there that it's you can only prepare so much.
Absolutely. Now, you've cited mental toughness a lot, which is really interesting to hear. Is your do you think that that's something that can be learned, or is that something of like an innate ability that everybody either has or doesn't have?
I mean, I think everybody has it. I mean, humans, we evolved from some through some very hard, serious times. We all have ancestors who dealt with serious amounts of pain and discomfort and just in everyday life, not even pursuing something. So yeah, I think we all have it in us. But it definitely, I think, can be, it's like any tool. You can sharpen it and make it more applicable and more accessible. Um, and that's just, I think, for me, anyways. It's just being out and doing stuff, skiing, backpacking, cycling. If you do enough of that stuff in the mountains, you're gonna get handed to you a few times, and just learning to deal with those conditions and those situations, how to stay warm, and um, you know keep your body from falling apart. Those skills come in to play really well in ultra racing for sure.
And now, how often do conditions, whether maybe your own mentality or just weather, altitude, cold, how often does it get to the point where you're thinking about quitting either the race or the adventure? Uh,
Um, it depends on how bad it is. Uh, and I've definitely, I'll be honest, I've gotten a little softer as I've gotten older.
sure.
uh, yeah, I mean, 2021 CTR, we were going Durango to Denver, and it was probably 15, 20 miles from Silverton, and it just opened up like nobody's business, and lightning going off all around me. I was soaking wet. I got to Mullis Pass, and you actually descend the pavement into Silverton, and I don't know if I've ever been that wet in my life. And I got to Silverton, and I was like, this sucks. Um, but it's like, and that's when you have to be like, why am I doing this? And is that a good enough reason to put up with the comfort? And that's a question you only could really answer at that time. And it's a different answer for everybody. A lot of people did not leave Silverton in that race because it was just nasty. A lot of people stopped in Silverton and then waited for it to kind of stop and kept going. And that's what I did. And I don't think I'd ever stopped in Silverton in the CTR before. It was definitely like, I was like, it felt weird. Like, I was like, what am I doing? Do I have enough food? Because I also missed getting food in Silverton.
Oh,
But I wasn't going to wait until 8 o'clock in the morning when the store opened. And so I was like, well, we'll see what happens. And I made it. I didn't have a lot of food. I got to Buena Vista, but I had a little bit. And
Silverton is one of my favorite towns in Colorado. Just kind of this like iconic little mountain town. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that the 2021 race. It seemed like there was quite a bit of weather, and Silverton is, I would say, fairly early on.
yeah,
In
80
right
miles. You know,
there you go. And so it sounds like it was quite a trial just to maybe to have that much weather wash over the racers that early puts everybody in a pretty rough spot. Um,
yeah, everyone had to be soaked. It was just so wet. Yeah, so wet and cold. And the thing about Silverton is, if, when you leave Silverton on the CT, you're gonna climb up to 12, 13,000 feet. And that's what I was like. I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to stay in Silverton because it was still relatively early. You know, it was like 15 hours into the race or something. And but I didn't want to go up to 13,000 feet because I was freezing. And I mean, Silverton's like probably 9 or something. And I was like, if I'm cold in Silverton, I was just like, oh no, like, and it was literally one of those things where like everything kind of fell apart for a minute, and I was like, what do I do? And I just found a dry spot and slept for a little bit, and then it stopped raining, and I made a push for altitude and went for it, and it was fine. It wasn't too bad, but I was definitely intimidated for sure.
it's it's interesting to hear, even somebody like yourself. I mean, like the veteran racer here, be put in a scenario where you're very much thinking through your options and maybe aren't sure what's the best
Oh yeah.
strategy.
I had that realization too at that time. I was like, damn, I don't know what to do. Like, yeah, I was like, my raincoat sucks. Kind of like, it was kind of like a eye-opening, slightly embarrassing moment. Um, yeah, because I was like, damn, I don't have a good answer to this.
Well, I think too, it just speaks to the difficulty of the race and then adding, or difficulty of maybe the trail and then adding a race on top of that just kind of ramps up,
Oh, there's no doubt.
turns the dial up. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always said that like finishing the CT in any way, shape, or form is a feat. And racing, it's just taking it to a kind of ridiculous level. Because like I said, I've hiked it and it was so hard, and I've toured it and that was hard. And yeah, trying to race it and like, there's been years where we were racing it as hard as we possibly could and really pushing it, sleep deprivation wise and mileage wise, and just uh, it was gnarly. So yeah, it's something else for sure.
Well, I guess I would pull out of that. I really like how you say finishing the CT in any way, shape, or form. It seems like the community as a whole is so welcoming to completing this trail in any way you can. I mean, there's a wide spectrum, but the CTR has a very narrow spectrum. It sounds like of riding style. Who should ride bike pack the CT, and then who should jump in and actually do the race?
That's a great question, and that's something that I try to communicate to people. Is that I think a lot of people are um, somewhat romanticizing the CTR and not realizing that they're probably better off just riding the CT. Um, the CTR, we have, there's some fairly specific rules to try to make it as even of a playing field for everybody as possible. And staying within those rules is tricky when things get ugly or not as much fun. Whereas if you're touring it and those kind of situations arise, just who cares? Like take a deep detour, go to a different, take an easier way over. Um, have some friends meet you in camp for the night. Like all those things they're perfectly wonderful things to do. And that's actually how I've done some of the hiking on the CT is, when we had resupplies, we had I organized people coming out and meeting us at Trailheads, and we'd have like a little party at night, and then we'd leave with our bags full of food the next day, and it was awesome. Um, and that's what I think. There's like, yeah, as we alluded, there's many ways to do the CT. The race is really about pushing yourself, um, and it's all about, being as self-supported as possible and going as fast as you possibly can, and it's being self-reliant as you possibly can. And that's definitely a firm distinction. Yeah.
Right, right. And that's the one call out as I was kind of looking through your race entry. Not that it's not that it's extensive, but it does seem to be very much that self-supported ethos or unsupported bike
Yeah,
race ethos is what you're going for.
for sure. And that's what the CTR has always been about, and that's what we're trying to maintain as much as possible is just keeping it do it yourself. As simple as that, really.
Now, because I know you wear a couple different hats, and it's interesting to hear about you wanting to push yourself on the trail. How is it both being race director and often a competitor in many of these races?
Um, yeah, so I think I've only done the CTR once since I've been the race director, and that was in 2021. And it was definitely a lot of work, um, getting to the start line and starting myself. It was definitely stressful, and like the role of being the CTR director has definitely been more work than I expected, and I took it over in 2020. We didn't have a race that year because of COVID. So 2021 was the first year that I was actually in charge of the race, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of responsibility. I take like I feel a lot of responsibility for all those people going out there, even though once they start, they're technically all on their own and they're supposed to be self-reliant. I still feel an amazing amount of responsibility for, um, it's like a bunch of people going out and knowing how hard it is and how many places you can get hurt and all the mountain passes you have to cross and the weather and all those things. Like it definitely, it was, it was kind of a heavy burden to carry. Um, but, uh, but once I was out there, it felt fairly normal, as far as for a race experience.
Sure,
Um,
back into the swing of things.
yeah, and I mean it was a hard year for me. It was also um, the first CTR I'd done since being a father, and I have so much respect for everybody that does these things with a family. It's it's so much harder. Like there's not even words for describing how much harder it is. And like I said, like that combined with, dealing with other people's questions and getting everybody a tracker, it was hectic getting up to the start line for sure.
Are like I mean, are you hoping that that over time, you're getting more into the swing of things of being able to balance it out, or is it just chaotic by nature?
Um, it's just like the last like month gets kind of chaotic.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, like I said, I think a lot of it too is my own sense of responsibility and just wanting to try to do my part as best as I possibly can. Um, yeah, and just trying to get people to have as much understanding of it as is possible without having done, um, which is really tricky. I think that there's, like people who have done it have a totally different understanding, even experienced people who haven't done it. It's such an ass kick of an experience.
Now, along those lines, is your thought process and your ideas, it sounds like you very much want to preserve the ethos of the race of the event. Um, is is your thought process that because it's still a relatively small, I think the group start this year is limited to 74 people.
Yep.
um is your belief like long term that you want to keep it a small event like this, or is your hope to grow it out as well?
Nope. I have no intentions of growing the event. Um, yeah, and that's why I do like to encourage people to experience it in a way outside of the race itself. And we do welcome ITTs, individual time trials. Um, if you want to compare your time to other people, that's you can do that anytime the trail's open, um, just to spread things out. And that's the thing. As a hiker, and as a empathetic person,
Sure.
having a ton of bike racers on the trail at the same time definitely affects other people's experience. And I don't want to, affect someone out there enjoying their hike. Um, I don't want to bring that down. It spreads out incredibly after the first, I would say, 14 hours. And that's one of the reasons why we start early in the morning, is just to get that spreading out before anybody even wakes up, hopefully. But there's no doubt that having a bunch of racers on the course changes things for other people. You don't want to make that any worse. Yeah.
On the flip side, though, I would say the year that I rode the Colorado Trail, the race, unbeknownst to me, was actually coming in the other direction, and it was I what I walked away with is that it was like awe inspiring watching the competitors kind of blast through, with really limited gear. So it really reset my mindset for like what was possible in these trails.
And there's a ton of people who are super stoked on it. Hikers, bikers, everybody. But there's definitely people who aren't.
Sure,
And I'm
sure.
definitely I'm sensitive to those people's experience too. So, but no, I would say the majority of hikers are really cool. And I always tell this people to racers too, like stop and talk to people, like, and because I've won the race a few times, and I stop and talk to people most of the time when I come across somebody who wants to talk, and it's great. Um, you get a little human interaction with somebody you've never met before, and even if you're not talking about trail beta, like it's just cool to see somebody else out there having a cool experience, and to share that with them for a few minutes. And like sometimes they'll be like, "So when did you guys leave?" And you tell them, and they're just like, because they've been out for like 20 days or something, and you're like, "Yeah, we've been out for a day and a half." And that, not to be cocky about it, but it's just fun to have that interaction with people, and like just like, you know, and obviously they're having a much different experience. They're having a lot more time out there and a lot of quiet time, and they're not driving themselves crazy with sleep deprivation. Um, and so yeah, and I just love the Colorado Trail so much. And like I said, it's like for me that's part of the experience, even when I'm racing, is meeting some of those people.
And like, I guess I would add to that it's also really interesting. Somebody like myself who's always interested in meeting these adventurers, and you flag sleep deprivation. It was I was taken aback by the level at which everybody was willing to push themselves into sleep deprivation and exhaustion. It was really, it's one thing to talk about it, but another thing to be that remote and to see people in that state. So it's really cool to see that. Um,
It messes you up. Yeah, it is man, sleep deprivation is just one of the craziest things you can do to your head. Yeah. I've done it probably a little too much. Yeah.
is is that one of the motivations for being out there, just to extend yourself and push yourself to that extreme?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the appeal of racing versus just being out there doing it. Is, you know, trying to see how fast or how hard you can push it. When we first started doing this stuff, we didn't really know how fast someone could go from Denver to Durango or vice versa. And we were out there just seeing what we could do. And yeah, it's amazing. Um, it's terrifying too, but it's also, you discover so much about yourself. There's no doubt about it. You know, I've told people before that like I don't feel like I have any dark corners left in my head because I think I've gone into them all. But those have been some really weird moments too, like out there by yourself, not seeing anybody really that you know, and just being kind of crazy with sleep deprivation. And it's pretty wild experience for sure.
Is is that something that you think it's maybe a like something positive that you think you learn about yourself and then take that away from the trail, or do you feel like that's contained within the races and it's just a unique experience?
Oh no, it definitely transcends into my life for sure. Yeah, no, I mean all the experiences I've had, uh, pushing myself, whether it's in a race or not, have uh, affected my thinking, my beliefs, and how I treat other people. So yeah, I feel like it trickles into my whole life without a question. Yeah.
Right on, right on. Now, let's talk a little bit more about like the history of the Colorado Trail. I know you were part of the inaugural race in 2007. How much has it changed since that first time to now?
The course has changed, um, fairly substantially. Well, I mean, fairly substantially. It's definitely gotten harder. It's gotten longer. Um, it's we've been running more or less the same course since 2013. Um, so it's been fairly consistent since then. There's only been a few small tweaks outside of Silverton since then. And other than that, the rules have more or less stayed the same. Um, yeah. It's there was I think 7 of us that started in 2007. Sorry. So it's definitely gotten a lot more popular. Um, and yeah, like I remember that year, like I think we were all pretty terrified because we just didn't know what to expect. There was no precedent to look at, no splits to figure out. Nobody really knew how long it was going to take to get from Buena Vista to, at that point, it was Lake City, to get resupply. And yeah, there was a lot of questions unanswered. It was also exciting. I mean, that's the thing too about not knowing, is you get to go out and find out, and it's wild. I mean, I won it that year, and it was 5 days, 5 hours, or something like that. And that's a fairly. Well, we're not going to say it's a slow time, but that's definitely not a winning time. Um, and of course, like I said, it's harder and longer than it was then, and people are going a lot faster, at least on occasion, a lot faster. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, really.
That's really cool to see. Has your gear setup changed from that inaugural race to now? Yeah.
Yeah, back then it was like a giant pack and a few bags on my bike. Yeah. Oh man, the packs we used to carry back then. It was so much food and stuff packed into a really good sized day pack. And there really wasn't that many bike packing bags available back then. And yeah, you had to be really creative. And bikes changed too. We were all running 2.2s back then, like 2.2-inch tires, and uh, like 100 mils of suspension travel, and pretty much all hardtails. And yeah, it's definitely that aspect's definitely gotten a lot better.
Sure, sure, a bit more clean.
Yeah,
Now, the actual the actual trail is interesting in kind of doing research and that and whatnot, because the CTR can't follow the CT directly,
correct.
due to limitations on where bikes can go and where bikes can't go. But I've also read stories, and I don't know. It seems like the early days are pretty hazy, so it's good to have you here on. I've read stories of, and I think it's prior to the CTR of people doing this, but disassembling the bike and kind of carrying it through specific sections.
I think a few people did that in the Lost Creek Wilderness, which is like the first wilderness you hit leaving Denver. And it's kind of a funny little spot. We, for the first, I think up until no, actually the first couple years we took what's called the Terriol Detour, which was 2007, 2008, where you basically go really far south and then you come way back north and then get back on the trail. And it's only like 7 or 8 miles of wilderness. So you do this like 70-mile detour to avoid 7 or 8 miles of wilderness. And I think a few people did take their bikes apart and hike it. Um, but it's really not a sustainable way to do it. You're really not supposed to possess a bicycle in the wilderness. Um,
Ugh.
like the AZT 800, you hike through the Grand Canyon with your bike. But that's national park. And from what I understand, the rangers are okay with that as long as your wheels don't touch the ground. But actually possessing a bicycle in the wilderness is illegal. And so it's definitely not a good idea to send a bunch of people out to do that. And then there was a period of time where we actually took 285, which is a pretty busy highway, but was much more direct to go around that wilderness. But it was terrifying. Every single time I rode that, I was like, I can't believe I'm still alive. It was so scary. So yeah, I would much prefer the Terriol. And that's what we still take these days is the Terriol. Yeah, it's fairly quiet and it's at least half of it's dirt.
If you could, if you could wave your hand now as race director, and I know dealing with the park services is just layers of bureaucracy. I mean, would you advocate for a scenario where you can disassemble your bike and carry it through, or do you kind of prefer just the way things are?
Um, I, I'm fine with it the way it is. Um, yeah, it would be an interesting tweak, I guess, because it would definitely require a whole different setup and some different skills for sure. But I'll save that for the AZT 800. Um, yeah, I don't necessarily want to make the CTR harder.
Okay.
Um, and I feel like that would potentially make it harder, even though, you'd be making it 63 miles shorter. I think it would still be a little bit harder just because you have to deal with all the logistics. Um, and, and, and like, it is impossible. And I don't have a magic wand for that one. But yeah, like I said, even if I did, I kind of like the course the way it is for the most part. There's a few places where I would still like to be able to change the course if I could, but definitely not in the way I can foresee anytime soon.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're right. Right there's a bureaucracy, even to the chaos master. Um, Now, we gotta touch just a little bit on the AZT.
Okay.
You won it and set the single speed record this year. That is
Yeah,
incredibly impressive.
yes, I guess I did. Yeah.
Is it? I've seen a lot of success with single speed riders, or it seems like from afar. Is there something inherently better at going single speed versus a traditional gearing?
That's such a great question. No. Uh, and it's funny. I've had this discussion with a bunch of other single speeder bike backer race people, and we all, I think we have a similar response in that there's some simplicity that maybe is a little bit of an advantage, like especially in the AZT. Now that it's in October, the two times that they had it in October, it's been very overgrown trail. And I would imagine a derailleur would be a little bit of a liability in those conditions because you're just thrashing through a lot of overgrowth and rocks and stuff. But beyond that, I don't think a single speed is really much of an advantage. It's a tiny bit lighter. It's definitely a little bit simpler. But I really think that just highlights that the people who typically ride single speeds a lot are just tough, maybe a little dumb. And that has an incredible it takes you a long way in the world of ultra racing. Just being able to put up with discomfort. And I think, like I said, some single speeders are they just grudge it out.
I like it. Hard headed. I
Yeah,
have heard.
stubborn.
There you go. Stubborn.
Wrong,
Now
stubborn. Yeah.
of course, you got to have that mentality, right? No, I have heard the argument, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Being a single speeder, or at
Yep.
least relatively recently, that one of the advantages is, especially on the CT, when you if you're on a single speed, so one gear, when you can't pedal anymore, it's time to walk anyway. And maybe
Yeah. There's something to be said about that. I mean, I often tell people that I don't walk much more on a single speed than I would on a geared bike. And it's kind of like after the first 24 hours, I'm going to probably walk 90% of the same things without gears as with a full range gear. Um, I just love my single speed. And I think there's a lot of to be said about that for other single speeders too. There's some of us that just love that simple, no thinking, no extra moving parts. You're kind of a little bit more connected to the trail in a way too, not to be elitist or anything like that, but it's simple and kind of almost spiritual in a sense. Like I said, not to be elitist, it's for us anyways, for those who like to choose.
absolutely, absolutely. I know we've talked a little bit about what the future of the Colorado Trail Race looks like. Kind of from that angle. But what are your personal like future ambitions, or how do you think about that?
I hope to do it a few more times, personally. And yeah, as far as like, being the chaos master or the director of the race, I just want to try to keep it going. And I think that there's, in order to keep, because it's an underground race, we don't have permits, we're not sanctioned, there's no money involved. And to keep something like that going, I think you kind of have to keep it simple and somewhat pure and try to minimize the impact of the race itself. And so that's kind of like my directive as the director, is to just try to keep the impact of the CTR as little as possible, so that we don't ruin a good thing, um, and hopefully keep it going. Um,
I have to say it is really interesting to hear your thought process on terms of the low impact. I'm just thinking of like maybe not exactly comparable races, but I know it as Dirty Kansas, but now I think it's been renamed Unbound. And like you've seen the race really explode in population number wise, but it seems like you're going very much another direction of trying to keep it low key, trying to keep it uh, I don't know, maybe for a specific group of people that would really get a lot out of it.
yeah, and it is a special experience. Especially if you go fully into the self-supported aspect of it. Um, it's a very special thing to go from Denver to Durango or vice versa under your own power, completely self-sufficient, only getting commercially available services when you hit towns. Like just, you feel great about that. And, and you said the Dirty Kansas. I actually like to compare it to the Leadville 100.
Ah,
Because both races cross the Twin Lakes Dam outside of Twin Lakes, Colorado, or between Leadville and Buena Vista. And I've crewed for the Leadville 100. I've been at that dam during the Leadville, holding bottles to teammates and stuff like that. And it's insane. There's cars parked for like a mile down the road, and there's like, probably 50 to 60 easy up set up. And there's probably 1,000 people there helping the racers. And when you go through there on the CT, or during the CTR, there's a couple people fishing and, people out day hiking. And, and I'm not dissing on the Leadville. It's cool for that experience, but like, there's no doubt there's a huge difference in impact and experience. Like by then, either direction in the CTR, there's maybe a few people riding within a few miles of you, but you're pretty much on your own. And it's it's a very private experience versus a very public experience. Um, Comparing those two races in that same spot, and that's what we want to do. We want the CT to be a personal experience as much as possible.
That's an excellent comparison, and I feel like that's a really great way to kind of frame what you're trying to achieve with the CTR. Um, Hefe, it has been amazing having you on. Thank you so much for taking me through, your racing career, your thoughts as an outdoorsman, and as well as now, being the director and chaos master of the CTR. Any closing thoughts?
Uh, I just encourage people to get out there and pursue their dreams and spend some time outside. It's always worth it.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, no worries.